My name is Erin Hartson, and until 4 days ago, I was the lead quality assurance engineer on Ridge Technologies' flagship product launch, a revolutionary cloud-based analytics platform called InsightFlow that was supposed to make the company millions. I'd been with Ridge for 3 years, working my way up from junior tester to the person everyone secretly relied on to catch the problems nobody else wanted to find. You know that person in every tech company? The one who finds the bug that would have crashed the system during the investor demo? Yeah, that was me. The CTO, James Whitmore, was one of those Silicon Valley golden boys who believed his own hype. Harvard MBA, previous startup exit worth $30 million, the kind of guy who wore $400 Golden Goose sneakers to board meetings and called everyone chief or rock star. He drove a Tesla Model S with vanity plates that read Disrupt One and had this particular brand of arrogance that comes from being right just often enough to forget about all the times you were catastrophically wrong. The office walls were covered with his TechCrunch features and conference speaking photos, a shrine to his own success story. Our team was small but tight-knit. There was Alex Chen from DevOps, always calm under pressure, the kind of guy who could debug a server meltdown while sipping green tea and making dad jokes. Samantha Brooks, our project manager who could wrangle timelines like a magician and somehow made everyone believe impossible deadlines were totally achievable, and Tom Rodriguez, the back-end developer who wrote code like poetry, elegant, efficient, and surprisingly beautiful when you understood what you were looking at. We'd been crunching for months, surviving on energy drinks, takeout Thai food, and the shared delusion that we were changing the world one line of code at a time. The launch was set for Friday, just 5 days away. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Ridge Technologies had bet everything on InsightFlow. Our biggest client, Meridian Financial, was ready to sign a 7-figure contract, $3.2 million over 3 years, based on our demo. The entire company's future hung in the balance, and everyone knew it. We'd burned through most of our Series B funding on development, and if this launch flopped, there wouldn't be a Series C. The 47 employees, the ping-pong table, the artisanal coffee machine, the dreams of IPO riches, all of it depended on the next 5 days going perfectly. But here's the thing about high-stakes situations, they tend to bring out either the best or the absolute worst in people. And James Whitmore was about to show us which category he fell into. It was Monday morning, 8:47 a.m. to be exact, and I'd just finished running our final comprehensive test suite. The automated tests had taken 14 hours to complete, a marathon of edge cases, stress tests, and integration scenarios that would make most QA engineers weep. I'd found something troubling, a race condition in the data synchronization module that only appeared under very specific load conditions. It wasn't the kind of obvious bug that crashes your system with a helpful error message. This was subtle, insidious, the kind of bug that would slip past most testing protocols like a ghost in the machine. But I'd seen enough edge cases in my career to recognize the pattern: concurrent database writes happening milliseconds apart, causing data to overwrite itself in unpredictable ways. I knocked on James's glass office door, one of those pretentious floor-to-ceiling glass walls that was supposed to symbolize transparency but really just meant everyone could watch you have awkward conversations. My laptop was tucked under my arm, and I could feel my heart already beating faster because I knew this conversation wouldn't go well. James had this way of making you feel like you were interrupting something important even when he was just scrolling through Twitter. He was on a call, gesturing dramatically with a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than my monthly rent, but waved me in with that impatient little finger curl that somehow managed to be both welcoming and dismissive. "What's up, Erin?" he asked, not bothering to mute his call. I could hear someone on the other end discussing Q4 market projections and something about synergistic revenue optimization. Silicon Valley buzzword bingo at its finest. "I found an issue with the sync module," I began, opening my laptop to show him the test results. "Under high concurrent load, there's a potential data corruption scenario that could..." "Hold up." He held up a hand, finally muting his call. "Data corruption? Are you talking about that phantom issue you mentioned last week?" "It's not phantom. I've reproduced it consistently when simulating." "Erin." He leaned back in his chair, and I saw that look cross his face, the one that said he'd already made up his mind before I'd even started talking. "You know what your problem is? You overthink things." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of catching critical bugs, of staying late to verify fixes, of being the person who prevented disasters, all of it reduced to overthinking. "This could affect data integrity for our enterprise clients," I pressed on, trying to keep my voice steady. If Meridian Financial's data gets corrupted during high traffic periods? Look, he interrupted, that smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. I appreciate your thoroughness. But we've got a launch in 4 days, and honestly? I don't think we need you creating problems where none exist. Maybe it's time you step back from this project. The office went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to say he was kidding. But James Whitmore wasn't kidding. He was benching me. 4 days before the biggest launch in company history. You're removing me from the project? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm saying maybe you should focus on other things. Let the team handle the final push without distractions. I closed my laptop slowly, the click of the lid echoing louder than it should have. I said nothing. What was there to say? I stood up, walked to the door, and paused with my hand on the handle. When this bites you, I said quietly, not turning around, don't say I didn't warn you. Then I walked out. The next 4 days were the longest of my professional life. I watched from the sidelines as my team, my friends, worked around the clock to finalize the launch. The office had taken on that familiar startup crunch time atmosphere, empty energy drink cans forming aluminum pyramids on desks, programmers who hadn't seen sunlight in 72 hours, and the faint smell of stress sweat mixing with the aroma of cold pizza. Alex kept shooting me sympathetic glances across the office, his usual zen demeanor cracked with worry. Samantha tried to include me in casual conversations about non-project stuff, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. Her project management instincts were screaming that removing the QA lead 4 days before launch was corporate suicide, but James was the CTO. Tom was more direct. This is bullshit, Erin, he said during a coffee break on Tuesday, his voice low and urgent. We were standing by the espresso machine, a $15,000 Italian monster that James had insisted was essential for productivity. Everyone knows you're the best QA engineer we've ever had. Hell, you're probably the best QA engineer any of us have ever worked with. James is making a mistake that's going to bite us all in the ass. Maybe he's right, I replied, stirring sugar into my coffee with more force than necessary, the tiny spoon clinking aggressively against the ceramic. Maybe I do overthink things. Maybe I see problems that aren't really there. Since when is thorough thinking a bad thing in software development? Alex had joined us, looking exhausted. We're launching in 3 days, and honestly? I'm nervous as hell without you doing final checks. But James had made his decision, and James was the CTO. The company moved forward without me. I spent those days in a weird limbo, assigned to special projects, basically busy work while the real action happened around me. I updated documentation, reviewed old test cases, and tried not to watch the launch team's increasingly frantic energy as Friday approached. Wednesday brought the first demo with Meridian Financial. I heard cheers from the main conference room, the one with the 75-inch 4K display and the acoustic panels that James had installed to make our demos look more professional. Through the glass walls, I could see the Meridian executives nodding appreciatively as James clicked through slides about revolutionary analytics and paradigm-shifting insights. The platform performed beautifully under the controlled demo conditions, processing their sample data with elegant visualizations that made complex financial trends look like modern art. James emerged with his $1 million smile, pumping his fist like he'd just closed the deal of the century. The demo had gone perfectly. Everything was on track. Thursday was dress rehearsal day. The entire company, all 47 employees, gathered in the main workspace to watch the final run-through. James had set up a makeshift stage area, complete with a podium and professional lighting that cast dramatic shadows across his face. He stood there radiating confidence, his perfectly tailored blazer and designer jeans screaming disruption with style, as he clicked through slides about market penetration and revolutionary technology. He talked about how Insight Flow would democratize data analytics and empower businesses to unlock actionable insights. The platform performed flawlessly under moderate load, handling the simulated user traffic like a Formula One car cruising through suburban streets. More cheers. More congratulations. Someone started chanting "Ship it. Ship it," and soon the whole office joined in. I sat in the back, laptop open, running my own quiet simulations while everyone else celebrated. The race condition was still there, lurking in the code like a time bomb with a timer nobody could see. I'd run the tests a dozen different ways, adjusting parameters, trying to find scenarios where it wouldn't trigger. But every high-load simulation told the same story: when concurrent users hit the system hard enough, data would get scrambled. Financial records would show incorrect balances. Analytics dashboards would display impossible metrics. User trust would evaporate faster than venture capital in a bear market. But hey, what did I know? I was just the person who overthought things. That night, I went home to my tiny studio apartment in Soma and did something I'd never done before. I documented everything. Every test result, every screenshot, every conversation, every warning I'd given. I wrote it all down with timestamps and technical details, then saved multiple copies to my personal drive, my personal email, and a USB stick I hid in my jewelry box. Call it insurance. Call it covering my ass. Call it whatever you want. But I'd been in tech long enough to know that when disasters happen, the first thing executives do is look for someone to blame, and it's usually not themselves. I also did something else that night. I called my mentor, Dr. Sarah Chen, a former Google engineer who'd taught me everything I knew about quality assurance. She'd retired to Portland and now spent her days hiking and consulting for startups who were smart enough to listen to experienced voices. "They removed you from the project?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. "4 days before launch? Because you found a critical bug?" "Because I overthink things," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "Erin," she said, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice, not in me, but in the industry we both loved and served. In 30 years of software development, I've seen this pattern over and over. Companies that prioritize speed over quality, ego over expertise, politics over process. And you know what happens to those companies? They learn expensive lessons? The lucky ones do. The unlucky ones become cautionary tales. I had a feeling Ridge Technologies was about to find out which category they fell into. Friday morning arrived with all the fanfare Ridge Technologies could muster. The official launch was scheduled for 10 a.m. Pacific, time to coincide with peak business hours on the East Coast and maximum social media engagement. James had invited local tech reporters from TechCrunch, VentureBeat, and The Information. He'd posted countdown timers on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram stories. He'd even hired a professional videographer to capture the moment for posterity, planning to use the footage for future investor pitches and conference presentations. I arrived at the office to find the entire team buzzing with nervous energy that felt like pre-game jitters mixed with espresso overdoses. Someone had brought champagne, Dom Perignon, because of course it was Dom Perignon. Someone else had ordered catered breakfast from that trendy place in the Mission that charged $18 for avocado toast. The main conference room had been converted into mission control, with multiple 27-inch monitors showing system metrics, user analytics, social media feeds, and a live stream of tech industry Twitter. It looked like NASA's Houston control room, if NASA launched software products instead of rockets. At 9:58 a.m., James called for silence. The countdown began, displayed on the massive wall monitor in glowing numbers that made everything feel appropriately dramatic. 10, 9, 8. I found myself holding my breath despite everything, despite knowing what was coming, despite the knot of dread in my stomach. 3, 2, 1. We're live. Cheers erupted like a championship team had just won the World Series. Champagne corks popped with satisfying pops that echoed off the modern concrete walls. For exactly 47 minutes, I checked my watch. Ridge Technologies was living its dream. The platform launched smoothly, early adopters were logging in from across the country, initial user feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and the social media mentions were accumulating like digital confetti. Then my phone buzzed. A subtle vibration that somehow felt ominous. Then Alex's phone. Then everyone's phone started buzzing at once, a symphony of notification sounds that turned celebration into confusion in seconds. The alerts were coming from our monitoring systems. Error rates were spiking. Database connections were timing out. And then, the thing I'd been dreading, data synchronization failures started cascading through the system. The race condition I'd identified was triggering under real-world load, just as I'd predicted. User data was getting corrupted, financial records were being scrambled, and our biggest client's demo environment was showing completely incorrect analytics. James went pale. The celebration died like someone had pulled the plug on a sound system. "What's happening?" he demanded, rushing to the monitors. "Tom, what am I looking at?" "Data corruption," Tom said grimly, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Looks like a race condition in the sync module." Users are reporting inconsistent data, and Meridian's dashboard is showing garbage numbers. The room fell silent except for the frantic clicking of keyboards and the increasingly urgent beeping of alert systems. Then the door burst open. James came rushing in, his face flushed, sweat beading on his forehead, his perfectly styled hair disheveled for the first time since I'd known him. His eyes found me immediately, cutting through the crowd of panicking engineers like a laser. "Erin," he shouted across the room. "Why didn't you flag this bug?" The silence that followed was deafening. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at me, then at James, then back at me. The absurdity of the moment was so complete that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I stood up slowly, pulled out my laptop, and opened the documentation I'd prepared the night before. "You mean this bug?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly across the room. I turned my laptop screen toward the group. "The one I reported to you on Monday? The one you dismissed as overthinking? The one that got me removed from this project?" James's face went through several interesting color changes, red to white to a sort of greenish pallor. That's not, you should have been more insistent," he stammered. "Should I?" I clicked to the next screen. Should I have been more insistent than documenting the exact failure scenario? More insistent than showing you reproducible test cases? More insistent than warning you about data integrity risks to our enterprise clients? The room was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system cycling. "Because if you'll recall," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word, "your exact words were that I overthink things. That I was creating problems where none exist. That the team should handle the final push without distractions." Alex was nodding grimly. Samantha had her face in her hands. Tom was looking at James with an expression I'd never seen before, pure disappointment. Meanwhile, the alerts kept coming. Our phone system lit up with angry calls from early adopters. Social media mentions were turning negative in real time. And somewhere in Meridian Financial's offices, executives were probably questioning whether they wanted to sign that 7-figure contract after all. "Can you fix it?" James asked quietly, all his bluster gone. I looked at him for a long moment. The golden boy CTO who'd bet everything on being smarter than everyone else. Who'd dismissed the person whose job it was to prevent exactly this disaster. "I can try," I said. "But first, I think we need to have a conversation about what overthinking actually means in software development." The next 6 hours were a blur of emergency patches, database repairs, and damage control. I worked alongside Tom and Alex to implement the fix I'd already designed earlier in the week, because yes, I'd thought ahead that far. We managed to stop the data corruption and restore most of the affected records. But the damage was done. The launch was a public disaster. Meridian Financial postponed their contract signing, pending further evaluation. The tech reporters who'd come to cover our success story wrote about our spectacular failure instead. James spent most of the day on crisis calls with investors and board members. I heard raised voices from behind his office door more than once. By evening, the immediate fire was out, but the smoke lingered. The office had emptied except for the core team and a few executives. James finally emerged from his office, looking older than he had that morning. He found me at my desk, finishing up the incident report that would eventually make its way to the board. "Erin," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" We went to the small conference room where, just days before, he'd celebrated the successful Meridian demo. The champagne bottles were still there, unopened now and somehow sad. "I owe you an apology," he began. "A big one." I waited. "You were right. About the bug, about the risk, about everything. I was so focused on hitting our launch date that He trailed off, running his hands through his hair. "I dismissed the one person whose job it was to prevent this exact scenario." "Why?" I asked. It was the question that had been eating at me all week. "Why did you remove me from the project instead of listening to my concerns?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the lights of the city below. "Because you made me nervous," he admitted finally. "You found problems I didn't want to exist. You asked questions that didn't have easy answers. And I thought I could control the narrative better without you raising flags that might spook the investors or delay the launch." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. "The irony," I said, "is that if we'd fixed this bug on Monday, we could have launched on schedule with a better product." Instead, we launched a broken product on schedule and destroyed our credibility. I know. He looked tired. The board is meeting tomorrow morning. There's going to be fallout from this, and most of it's going to land on me. As it should. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sympathy. James Whitmore was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the value of listening to people who overthink things. For what it's worth, I said, I hope you get another chance. You're not a bad CTO when you're not trying to prove you're the smartest person in the room. He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Thanks. I think. As I packed up my laptop to go home, I realized something had shifted. Not just in my relationship with James, but in how I saw myself. For years, I'd apologized for being thorough, for asking uncomfortable questions, for finding problems that others preferred to ignore. But problems don't disappear just because we ignore them. They just get bigger. Outro. So here's what I want you to take away from this story. In a world that's always rushing toward the next deadline, the next launch, the next big thing, be the person who asks the uncomfortable questions. Be the person who digs deeper when everyone else wants to move faster. Be the person who overthinks things. Because here's the truth they don't teach you in business school, there's no such thing as overthinking when the stakes are real. There's only thinking and not thinking. And when you're responsible for other people's data, other people's money, other people's trust, not thinking isn't an option. James learned that lesson the hard way. Ridge Technologies learned it too. The company survived, barely, but it took months to rebuild trust with clients and investors. James kept his job, but with significantly less autonomy and a new appreciation for the people who sweat the details. As for me? Well, let's just say I never apologized for being thorough again. And the next time someone tells you that you overthink things, maybe you should ask them what the alternative looks like. Trust me, you won't like the answer. What's your story about standing up for doing things right? Drop it in the comments below, and remember, subscribe if you want more tales from the trenches of tech. Because in this industry, there's always another disaster waiting to happen, and someone has to be brave enough to see it coming.